So here's some of the most common toxic metals that we see. I'm not going to go through every single toxic metal. We just don't have the time or bandwidth to cover all of it. But these are some of the most common ones that I see in people that we actually test for heavy metal exposure or heavy metal bioaccumulation. Mercury, so Hg is mercury. And then we have lead here, Pb, and then aluminum, cadmium, and thallium. That's an A. So these metals are some of the most common ones that we'll see in people today that come in and get actually testing done. And so to give you an idea for where these exposures are commonly coming from with mercury, you know, a lot of it is seafood, and it's not all seafood, so I don't want to say don't ever eat seafood, but it's the bigger the fish, the more the potential for exposure. So the bigger the fish, the greater potential for quantity. Now, some companies do mercury testing on their seafood, and I would say if you're in the market and you really like seafood, or you're trying to follow a diet with a higher seafood quantity, go for smaller fish like anchovies and sardines. The smaller the fish, the less bioaccumulation of the metal from the ocean water runoff that they have. The bigger the fish, the more potential. So tuna would be a higher mercury containing fish. Salmon potentially higher in mercury. But don't necessarily need to avoid seafood per se, but just be aware, again, that can be a source of exposure. We also have dental amalgams. Now, this is becoming less true with the advancement of time. And what I mean by that is a lot of the original amalgams, the silver amalgams, or silver fillings, if you will, had mercury in them. And so if you've had, again, if you were born kind of 1970s or even prior, the likelihood that when you went to the dentist that your cavities would have been filled with a silver filling versus, say, today that you make them out of different types of composite materials, the likelihood that you had mercury put in your mouth is very high. So if you open your mouth, an easy way to know this, open your mouth, look in the mirror. If you've got a bunch of kind of dark fillings in your teeth, then you know those are silver amalgams and there's probably mercury in them. And the problem with those is that they can slowly expose you to mercury as you chew, as you break those fillings down. Now, the reason dentists used silver fillings is because they're really super stable and they sealed cavities really, really well. So from a materials perspective, they did a fantastic job. And a lot of these fillings, even if you have them, they may be stable. I would say not every silver filling absolutely needs to be emergency-based removed tomorrow. So if you're looking at that and you've got some silver fillings and you're like, should I or should I not have them removed? My advice to anyone who's got silver fillings in their mouth is first, before you just go and remove them, test your body to make sure that mercury is even a problem for you, because if it's not, it may not be something that you prioritize first as a first line of something you need to go run out and do, because this can get really costly. I mean, you can spend thousands of dollars having silver amalgams removed. Plus, if you're going to do it, you need to find a good biological dentist who's well-versed in the proper removal of those amalgams, because a lot of times what happens is they pull them out, but they don't protect you as they're pulling them out. Remember, silver amalgams are caustic, and so once they break into them and crack them open, you can now be exposed to, or accidentally swallow a bulk dose of mercury, and that can make you sick. I've actually seen this happen to people where they worked with a dentist who didn't protect them properly during the removal. So make sure you work with a biological dentist if you're gonna go and get these removed. Or at the very least, work with a dentist, even if they're not registered with biological dentist associations. Make sure they had a special training to properly remove or safely remove mercury amalgams or silver amalgams. Then the other place that we get it is shots. Now, this has somewhat changed in the past few years, where mercury used to be in like the flu shots that were given, and a number of others, MMR and some of the others, but they've gone and replaced a lot of the shots that used to contain mercury, and then they've gone and replaced some of that with aluminum. So now, you can check the inactive ingredient list on any of these and kind of see which ones contain, but just be aware this is another one of the places where people get exposure. It's one of the reasons why right now scientists are starting to question a lot of those generalized recommendations that have been put in place over the years. Because this is actually one of the reasons, are these heavy metal contaminants that are actually used on purpose in those. They're used as adjuvant agents to help stimulate the immune system. And so again, many people, especially genetically susceptible individuals, can overreact to some of these, and this is why you can see some people getting injured. Not everyone does, but many people we have seen over the years as a result of heavy metal contaminants. And then we have lead. Lead, where do most people get their exposure today? Predominantly water. And this is like the city water supply, depending on the age of the city's infrastructure where you're at. Again, I use Flint, Michigan as the example there of an infrastructure that was lead contaminated. We also see, a lot of things that are made in China. And this is not just like pots, pans, cups, and other things. This could also be food. So food products, baby formula, perfect example. We've seen recalls of lead and baby cereals, recalls because of lead toxicity or an abundance of lead. So beware, made in China. You want to really be cautious, because there's a reason why a lot of companies have outsourced their businesses overseas. It's because there's less EPA oversight. When you go and do business where there's less oversight and you can import those products back into the country, there's just not the same oversight that you would have if those people had their factories over here. So a lot of companies skirt the oversight, produce in China, and bring back cheaper products that are contaminated with metal. So my advice is, if you're looking at food, don't buy made in China. If you're looking at pots and pans and other things that have the potential to be contaminated with metal, it's better off buy U.S., buy American made, or buy European made, but avoid, in my opinion, avoid this if you want to avoid lead. And then the last reason why we'll see lead, very common, has to do with the bioaccumulation. And I was talking about this a moment ago. This is the chronic exposure of low doses of lead, because historically as a nation we've used it in paints and gasoline and as additives and other things, and so we've got this bioaccumulation that's occurred. I think it's important to say too that lead is one of the heavy metals that crosses the placenta. So if you are a pregnant mother and you are being exposed to lead, your baby is then going to be exposed to that lead, because lead can cross the placenta and it can make your baby exposed, and that can then start to accumulate even in utero in your baby. So you want to be aware and you want to be cautious that you're doing everything you can to avoid exposure during pregnancy, ladies. And so again, it crosses the placenta, so you got to watch out. And then we have aluminum, and aluminum is used, the classic is foil, right? So aluminum foil, a lot of people used to cook or bake with, but you also have tin cans and other forms of cookware that are aluminum based. And so again, high quality cast iron, high quality stainless steel would be better options, in my opinion, if we're talking about aluminum free types of cookware. Again, don't drink out of tin cans. A lot of people do. I don't recommend it. Try to avoid that, and try to avoid, having your food cooked directly on the foil. If you're wrapping a lid with foil and it's not actually touching or permeating your food, you're probably better off or okay, but cooking directly on the foil, I would be cautious about that for that exposure to aluminum. So we have cadmium. Cadmium, oftentimes found in the water. A lot of the batteries being produced today are cadmium based, the DiCad batteries, and so those batteries, they bury them, they put them in the ground, and where do they end up? They end up in groundwater as well as soil as they break down. We also see a lot of cadmium in contaminated foods. It's a big one that we see. Cadmium also found, a lot of it, if you're a smoker, this is a good reason to add smoking cessation to your resolution list of improving your health. But smoking can increase you to massive quantities of cadmium over your lifetime, or cadmium contamination. So what foods are richest or highest in cadmium potential problems? It would be rice. And this is one of the reasons why, when I wrote No Grain, No Pain, heavy metals was one of the reasons to avoid all grains, not just wheat, barley, and rye, because, a lot of your foods that are high or a lot of your rice-based foods, I should say, are high in cadmium, also high in lead. We get rice can be contaminated with arsenic, which is not on this top 5 list, but we could put it as a bonus. We could put arsenic on here, and we could also say, rice being one of the biggest sources of chronic bioaccumulative exposure, because a lot of arsenic is used to make pesticides, which then end up in the soil, and so then when we're growing those foods, we're getting exposure to that, because those foods, especially rice, is really good at this. It pulls arsenic and cadmium and lead out of the soil into itself, and then when we go to eat those things as staple foods and feed our babies, rice cereals and other things, we're exposing them to high levels of these compounds early in life, and that's no good, because remember, what did we say earlier? The impact and the effect is multisystemic, right? Nervous system, kidneys, liver, potential for cancer, heart, skin, immune system, genetic issues, all can occur. So obviously you don't want your babies being exposed to high levels of these contaminated foods. And the last one over here on the right is thallium. And thallium is a toxic metal. A lot of where we get today's exposure, where I see it, at least clinically speaking, is people that, and again, I'm not picking on you if you are following a plant-based diet or a vegetarian diet, but where do we get a lot of kale from environmentally, or not kale, where do we get a lot of thallium from environmentally? It's from kale. Kale's a superfood. We always hear that. Kale's this really, really healthy food that you should eat a lot of. Well, the problem that we're finding is that kale is super at detoxing the soil. Kale can detox soil very well. And so one of the things that we find in soil is thallium, because of this right here, because of the coal ash. One of the things that happens in the organic farming industry is they actually take a lot of coal ash, which is a byproduct of burning coal as fuel, and they sell that to the organic farming industry, and they use that as a soil amendment, if you will, to improve the soil. But that burn-off comes with a lot of thallium, so you end up with thallium in that soil. And if you're growing your organic kale in that particular soil, that kale super detoxifies the soil, pulls the thallium into it. So if you're doing heavy kale consumption, and I see this a lot in juicers, not just plant-based diet folks, but people who do a ton of juicing where they're using kale as a primary source of that green juice, but we're seeing them come back super high in thallium, and it can make you sick. So be careful.